In 1992, a man named Daniel Fuller wrote a book called The Unity of the Bible. One of the greatest Christian books ever written. In fact, John Piper said that other than the Bible, this is the most influential book he's ever read. The theme of Fuller's book is what in theological terms has been called redemptive history, sometimes called biblical theology. It's a branch of theology, and it is concerned with the single story of redemption unfolding through history. From the Old Testament through into the New Testament, that God's plan has never changed. And God's plan has been worked out in space and time. Okay, God doesn't just click his fingers and do what he wants to do in a single fiat act, which is like without context and without work in history. He just clicks his fingers and it just happens instantly. Well, he can do that, but he has chosen not to. God himself has chosen to use space, the created order. He's not bound by space, but he uses space and time. God is not bound by time. He inhabits eternity, but he has chosen to enter space and time and to work through history using the processes of space and time. That's why there is a story to tell. That's what history is. History is predominantly the story of God unfolding his great plan of redemption to purchase a bride for his son from amongst an unclean people. He chooses a bride for his son. Okay, big topic that. Now, what I want to do today is we just dip into, and I'm going to just shoot thoughts at you. We don't have time to read all the scriptures, but from Ezekiel 34 to 36, we're going to look at Ezekiel 34. This is day 12 through Ezekiel. We're going to look at a certain prophecy that Ezekiel makes, and then we're going to show how that unfolds through into the New Testament and how those same themes are picked up in the Gospels. We're going to see in John's Gospel, we're going to see in Matthew's Gospel, and then one of the other prophecies is fulfilled as we see Paul make some predictions in Romans chapter 11 about what's going to happen to the Jews. Okay, so I have a task now of how much I read and how much I don't. Anyway, let's see how much progress we can make. In Ezekiel 34, God, through the prophet, is rebuking the leaders of Israel. And he is saying to them, you are corrupt shepherds. You should have bound up the broken sheep. You should have sought out the lost sheep. You should have brought them home. And yet all you've done is use your position to enrich yourselves. And in fact, you've trampled on the sheep in the process. And it's interesting to note there that the state of the people, which was, they were lost in idolatry, they were sacrificing their own children, they were burning incense on all the hills outside of Jerusalem, and God judged the nation because of it, but God blames the leaders for the state of the people. That's interesting. You know why that's interesting, my friend? Because you are a sheep. And so am I. And we each need a good shepherd. We need to be looking to leaders who influence us positively. Have you realized that about yourself, my friend? You know, especially in the Western world, we seem to think of ourselves as so independent. And we snub leadership. We snub the government. And, you know, the truth is, my friend, you need good and godly influences in your life. The leaders that you look to and follow will influence you tremendously in your life. That's why you need to be so careful who you spend time with, what you read, what music you listen to. All these things are influencing you. Okay, so God blames the leaders for the state of Israel, and he says to them, you are corrupt leaders. Now, what's the answer to all this? Well, from verse 11, God then makes this prediction. He says, I myself will come and I will gather up my sheep. I will seek out the lost sheep. I will bind up the broken sheep. He says, I will do it. And then a little bit later on, how's he going to do it? How will God come and gather up his sheep? He says, well, I will establish one shepherd over them, and he shall feed them. Now, who will this shepherd be? Because he's just said, I'm going to come. Well, this shepherd will be my servant David. But how can it be his servant David? David's dead already when Ezekiel is making this prophecy. Well, of course, it goes back to that same promise that we've been seeing the whole time. God had promised that a king would be born in the line of David. One of David's descendants would be born and would take the throne of Israel again. And from that time forwards, forever, the throne will be established. And this servant, this son of David, will reign eternally. My servant David, he shall feed them and be their shepherd, and I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant a prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. So this shepherd will also be the prince, the one who sits on the throne, the son of David. And of course, this is fulfilled in the life of Jesus. And Jesus picks up this very prophecy in John chapter 10. Again, I wish we could read the whole thing. But he's rebuking the Pharisees. The same theme. He's rebuking the leaders of Israel. And he then says, I'm the door of the sheep. Whoever came before me, all those leaders of Israel were thieves and robbers, but they came only to steal and kill and destroy because they were enriching themselves, corrupt leadership. But I am the good shepherd, and I give my life for the sheep. And all the themes of predestination are in John chapter 10 as well. It's a wonderful and complex series of scriptures. But Jesus is saying, I am the good shepherd, prophesied by Ezekiel. I have come. I am the one born into the family of David, which he was. Essentially saying, I'm the Messiah. And Ezekiel then also prophesies that this, when God comes as the good shepherd in the person of the Messiah, he will separate the sheep from the goats. And as for you, O my flock, thus says the Lord God, behold, I shall judge between sheep and sheep, between rams and goats. Is it too little for you that you've eaten up the good pasture, that you must tread down with your feet the residue of the pasture? To have drunk the clean waters, that you must foul the residue with your feet? As for my flock, they eat what you have trampled with your feet, and they drink what you have fouled with your feet. Therefore thus says the Lord God to them, behold, I myself will judge between the fat and the lean sheep. And then, of course, Jesus arrives on the scene, and he then says, this is Matthew 25 from verse 31, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. And then that great parable continues of how he says, well, I was hungry and you fed me, I was naked and you clothed me. And they said, but when did we do that? And he says, well, when you did it for one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it for me. And then he says to those on the left hand, you goats, depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me no food, etc. So Jesus picks up this theme that Ezekiel has been prophesying, that there's going to come this shepherd, and he will separate the sheep from the goats. And he will search out for his own flock, and he will care for them. And then the final prophecy that I want to draw your attention to in Ezekiel 34 is the gathering of Israel from all the nations where they had been scattered. Now, of course, this did happen 70 years after the Babylonians took them captive. Through King Cyrus, God brought the Israelites back. But that is not the full fulfillment of what we see here, because what Ezekiel prophesies is that when the Israelites return, they're going to be saved In verse 13 he says, "And I will bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries and will bring them to their own land. I will feed them on the mountains of Israel and in the valleys and in all the inhabited places of the country. I will feed them in good pasture, and their fold shall be on the high mountains of Israel. There they shall lie down in a good fold and feed in rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I will feed my flock and I will make them lie down." So God says not only is he going to bring his people back, but he will be their shepherd. That did not happen fully. The full blessing on the nation of Israel did not happen when Cyrus sent the Israelites back and they went back with Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest at that point. There's coming a richer fulfillment of that, and this is what Paul brings out in Romans chapter 11. Verse 11 says this, "I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Certainly not. But through their fall," Paul is talking about the Jews, "through the fall of the Jews, because they've rejected the Messiah, to provoke them to jealousy, salvation has come to the Gentiles." And then he picks that thought up again through the whole of chapter 11, but we'll pick it up in verse 25. "For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come out of Zion, he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but concerning election, they are beloved for the sake of the fathers. For the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable." And so here Paul brings out this great theme that the gospel bore its fruit among the Gentiles. It broke out of Israel. Because when Jesus came, he was ministering only to the Jews. He was ministering to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. There it is again, that theme of the shepherd. But when the apostles began to preach the gospel after the resurrection to the Jews, they rejected the apostles. And so Paul wipes off the dust from his feet and he says, from now on, we go to the Gentiles. And so because the Jews rejected the gospel, it broke out of Israel and it went to the nations. And still today, it is bearing its fruit among the Gentile nations. 40 years after that, after Jesus was killed by the Jews, Jerusalem was completely destroyed. The temple was destroyed. It's never been rebuilt. The whole structure of what was binding the gospel within the nation was smashed. And so the gospel was liberated from Israel and it went to the Gentiles. And here Paul says that was the plan of God. The Jews rejected the Messiah because it was God's plan that they should do so that salvation could come to the Gentiles. But God is going to use at some point in the future this blessing on the Gentiles. It's going to use it to cause the Jews to be jealous because the Gentiles have inherited the blessings of Abraham, their forefather, and they will turn. Here's the prophecy. There is still coming a great turning of the Jews to Jesus. It hasn't happened yet. Now, if we read in conjunction with what Ezekiel was saying, that God is going to bless them on the hills of Jerusalem, on the hills of the land of Israel. He's going to bring them back to his land, and there he's going to feed them. Here's what I believe, that great turning of the Jews is also linked to a physical return of the Jews to Israel. This might happen in an instant when Jesus returns and his feet physically stand on the Mount of Olives. They might look on him whom they pierced and mourn for him as for an only son. That's one of the other prophecies, that at that moment they all are saved. We don't quite know how it's going to work, but this I can tell you, there is a plan of God unfolding, and it does include still the saving of the Jews. And so, wow, I mean, it's such a broad theme this morning, but let's just wonder and let's just glory in the single plan of God unfolding through history. Well, I hope that rejoices your heart as it does mine, that we are a part of something great. See you tomorrow.